Admiral Jake Morrison watched the stars the way people used to stare at fires, as if there was a story written in their light. The UES Phoenix hung between constellations, a white hull with blue stripes sliding through dark like a careful thought. For 3 months the ship had carried 200 scientists, linguists, engineers, and dreamers farther from Earth than any human vessel had ever gone. This was not a war mission. The Phoenix wasn't built to fight, she was built to listen, to translate silence into meaning. This was humanity's first true attempt at first contact. That phrase, first contact, carries weight. It tastes of hope and fear in equal measure. The crew had rehearsed for months what to send and how to send it, mathematics, prime numbers, simple pictograms. Captain Lisa Taylor had spent her life practicing how to open a conversation with a species that may not even share the same senses. Her brown hair was a knot at the back of her neck and her voice was steady the way oceans are steady until a storm arrives. "Admiral, we're getting something ahead," she said, holding a data pad like an offering. Lieutenant Dan Parker's screens mapped a shape that made everyone on the bridge lean closer. 5 signatures, moving in formation, Parker said. Unknown architecture. Energy harmonics don't match any catalog. They're deliberate. That word, deliberate, tightened Morrison's chest. After months of emptiness, the universe had decided to answer. He felt the old mixture, a scientist's thrill and a commander's dread. Every explorer knows the riddle, is the other intelligent, and if so, can they be trusted? Open a channel, Morrison ordered. We try the civilized approach first. Taylor stepped forward and did what she'd practiced 1,000 times, she transmitted pure, patient mathematics, simple images, and the human plea that the mission had trained for, we come in peace and wish to communicate. The message hovered in space, waiting for an answer. The response came fast. Faster than anyone expected. The alien formation altered course and closed. Their hulls were silver and sleek, engines like liquid stars, their movement had the precision of hunters. When the largest of them fired, the Phoenix felt it as if a hand had gripped her very ribs. Shields flared, alarms called out, and in the translator's tentative voice a word translated, vermin. They had prepared for confusion. They had not prepared for contempt. These are warships, Taylor murmured. They're not answering. They're taking positions. Morrison watched them circle, elegant and terrible. He could have ordered retreat, diplomacy, or surrender, but the lines between those choices blurred under bombardment. The alien beam struck instruments, systems hiccuped, and the ship shook. Power bled away like a wound. When the translator finally seized on more of the speech it rendered a command, surrender, submit, accept the authority of the Galactic Empire. A name. The Galactic Empire. The way it arrived through the speakers, clinical, absolute, changed the room. This was not a random pirate raid, this was contact with a polity, with history and hierarchy. Worse, they already had a narrative for humanity, and it placed humans beneath their notice. Morrison's voice was quiet in the chaos. This is Admiral Morrison of the United Earth ship Phoenix. We came to speak. Why are you attacking? The alien answer was contempt in a throat, friendship. You are a backwater race. Submit. Be managed. The word human arrived like an epithet. And yet the attackers did not wish to annihilate. Their shots targeted propulsion, power nodes, disabling rather than erasing. Maybe they hunted to capture. Maybe they assumed a species that could be catalogued, studied, later. In the pressure of the corridor, as lighting sparked and panels smoked, Morrison watched something else, Captain Taylor taken in the corridors by armored figures who moved like shadows. She looked back at him as if she were already negotiating their fate, a diplomat even when bound. When the Phoenix finally limped away, crippled and grieving, it carried with it the worst kind of knowledge, confirmation that other minds existed, and proof they were organized, hostile, and powerful. It carried also the ember of a different truth: the attackers had underestimated the human capacity to survive and to run home with warning. 6 months later the Phoenix sat in Earth orbit like a relic and a witness. Engineers crawled over alien-inflicted scars. Scientists turned alien shards over in gloved hands. Those shards whispered clues, advanced alloys, efficient power harmonics, designs optimized for speed and precision, and for a certain brittleness. Where alien engineering prized elegance and long testing cycles, something about the damage said their ships sacrificed resilience for performance. General Ryan Cooper read the strike reports under a ceiling of cold light. "If they bring a full invasion," he said, voices around him thin with worry, "our current defenses will not hold an hour." Dr. Amy Rodriguez pushed back with the kind of tired excitement only the truly curious show. "Their systems are patterned. Predictable. They're decades ahead in many areas, but their ships aren't built to take punch." She showed microscopic scans, layered composites that yielded suddenly under blunt trauma. "They're fast and fragile," she said. "We can weaponize force." Engineer Pete Johnson sketched with a kind of hungry joy. If the enemy taught them to copy, what if humans refused to be predictable? What if they did not imitate finesse but embraced brutality, a ship built to take punishment and to return more than it received? The image that rose from those sketches was the opposite of alien elegance, broad, armored, laden in ports and guns. A flying fortress. A refusal to be catalogued by imperial doctrine. "They expect us to be the same," Johnson said. "We'll be different." And somewhere far across the void, a blue-skinned sub-admiral named Vorak read the same Phoenix's battle logs with an annoying, small thought: conquering humans should have been trivial. 20 ships, 1 training exercise, and it had gone wrong. For him it was a bureaucratic irritation. For someone in another room it would become an obsession. The first contact had not been a greeting, it had been a scratch in the surface of a cathedral of power. But scratches bleed knowledge. Humanity had seen the Empire, and the Empire, in the form of reports, protocols, and arrogance, had noticed humanity back. The door had opened. Outside, something large and ancient shifted its boots. After the Phoenix returned with its wounds and witness, Earth did what it does best when threatened: it rebalanced priorities. Shipyards that had been making freighters and research hulls became furnaces for something else, a new breed of weapon and shield and will. The word Defiance began to circulate in blueprints, in meetings, in fevered sketches. It would become more than a name. The orbital yards bustled. Men and women who had never held a rifle volunteered to stack armor plate. Engineers swapped theoretical finesse for practical brutality. Under General Cooper's direction, months of quiet research turned into something furious and collaborative. They would not become the Empire. They would become something the Empire had never seen before. Dr. Amy Rodriguez stayed in the lab so long that her hair frizzed with solder fumes. Her team's work was a slow alchemy, twisting alien alloys with human metallurgy until new composites hummed with hybrid potential. The alien tech had a certain harmony, human tech had a certain stubbornness. When mixed, those qualities yielded something unpredictable and dangerous to those who expected rigid categories. "Humans iterate," Rodriguez told a room of skeptical officers. "We build, we break, we build again. The Empire designs for perfection. We design for adaptation. That's our advantage." Engineer Pete Johnson's sketches hardened into structure. The UES Defiance would be broad and heavy, it would trade speed for survivability and obscene volume of fire. Cannon ports opened like the eyes of a beast. Armor plates layered like geological strata. It was not elegant, it was honest, a ship designed to be hit and to keep giving back pain. The politics of it mattered. The military leaders spoke in cold charts about engagement ranges and power budgets. The designers argued about overpressure and thermal sinks. But under all the calculations there was a cultural decision: humans were going to face an empire that measured success by conquest and longevity, and humanity would answer with improvisation and blunt intelligence. Over the months the fleet that had once been a rumor became a small armada. 12 ships patterned after the Defiance crept out of dry docks. Each incorporated lessons learned at the edges, hybrid drives that could double output at the cost of efficiency, weapons that blended kinetic mass and charged plasma fields, armor that bent and held. Where the Empire expected restraint, humanity learned to weaponize unpredictability. On the other side of the galaxy, Admiral Vorak prepared too, but his preparation began from a different premise: contempt. For Vorak, humans were a small annoyance; for the Empire, they were a curiosity that had become a threat. 20 Imperial ships, sleek and seasoned, readied themselves like a blade being oiled. Vorak had authority and tradition. He had ships that responded with ballet-like precision. He had never needed to account for improvisation. He simply assumed pattern recognition would win the day. When his intelligence reports called the human vessels primitive and thankless, he smiled in the way bureaucrats smile before a victory. But the human response was not what he expected. He expected clone tactics and slow adaptation. He did not expect a ship built to defy expectation, that would turn the entire calculus of engagement upside down. Captain Ben Clark took command of the Defiance with a calm face and creased hands. He had naval years burned into him, he had been selected for steadiness. On the bridge, Commander Kate Williams mapped the approaching Imperial formation with a tactician's hunger. Their doctrines had been studied. Their habits predicted. Williams clicked through simulations she tailored for this day and found patterns Imperial captains used like second languages. She and Clark agreed on one truth: they could not beat the Empire on its own terms. They had to force the Empire into unfamiliar questions. When Vorak's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at Sol System's rim, the third planet below shimmered blue and vulnerable. 20 warships arranged themselves in practice geometry and began their scans. Vorak expected to find nothing but scattered resistance. Instead, his sensors flagged one large, strange vessel that did not fit models. "It's a ship," said a sensor officer, disbelieving. "Too large, too heavy." "A warship, but not according to Imperial metrics." Vorak's irritation became curiosity. He ordered the approach, polite demands for surrender, the velvet rope that often precedes conquest. On the viewport, blue skin and rigid posture spoke of empire. When Vorak announced submission or relocation, his voice carried the unshakable certainty of systems that had always obeyed him. Captain Clark refused. The reply was a diplomatic negation and a promise of violence. Vorak ordered the attack. Imperial formations danced, their initial strikes testing the Defiance's surface. Imperial weapons were beautiful and exacting, designed to stress and pry. The Defiance did not fall the way other targets had. Its armor smoked and glowered but held. For a moment the bridge of the flagship held silence, not victory, but the recognition of an anomaly. "Minimal effect," Lieutenant Tom Hayes reported. "Hull integrity holding." Williams' voice carried a different note: this was working. The Empire had patterns, it expected them. It had not written contingency for a species that engineered to absorb and then to hit. When the Defiance fired back, it did not fire politely. It unleashed hybrid salvos that combined kinetic projectiles and charged fields, fast, heavy, and mediated with a human's willingness to accept collateral unknowns. Those shots moved outside Imperial sensor comfort zones. They struck where Shield's harmonics were weakest, where Empire doctrine assumed rigidity. 3 ships dropped in the first exchange. Vorak stared at the feeds in a way that made him physically older. His fleet tactics had been optimized over centuries, over species, but they had not assumed a ship that would take punishment and then answer with a new kind of force. Panic is a practical thing in a command room, it rearranged priorities quickly. On the human bridge, they aimed not to erase but to teach. Captain Clark ordered that survivors be left where possible, a message sent in fire and in mercy. Humanity's first true victory would not be a scream of dominance, it would be a complicated letter written in hull breaches and evac shuttles: we will fight, but we will not become what we fight. As the Imperial fleet retreated, its doctrine unstitched, the ripple spread. Word travels faster than ships. In trade stations and neutral ports, sailors and merchants repeated the impossible. A single human warship had routed an entire squadron. The Empire's pride had been bruised in a way that would not heal in a generation. Back on Earth, Admiral Morrison read the incoming flood of requests like a man watching the sky change color. Alien governments he'd never imagined asked for parley. Alliances crept forward, fragile and sharp. Meanwhile the Empire assembled its answer in silence, a shadow of hundreds of ships forming like a storm. Humanity, for its part, did not stop. Factories accelerated. Volunteers filled quotas. New shipyards were christened with names that meant things now: determination, resolve, courage. Dr. Rodriguez did not rest. The hybrid machines hummed, Johnson's design team iterated overnight. They had shown the galaxy a new variable, and the Empire would try to eliminate it. In quiet moments, Morrison looked at a child's drawing someone had affixed to a bulkhead, stick figure humans waving at a bright star. The image was childish and astonishing. The galaxy had delivered its answer to humanity's greeting, not peace, not annihilation, but an education by fire. Humanity had replied in kind, with stubborn invention and a ship called Defiance that refused to be categorized. Victory is always a complicated currency. For humanity, the Defiance's triumph bought time and attention, but it also painted a target. The Galactic Empire's humiliation seeded obsession in its halls. Fleet Admiral Zargo convened emergency councils on the capital world of Hegemon Prime, strategy rooms filled with men and women who had never been surprised. The battle footage, authentic, replayed from multiple vantage points, refused to conform to doctrine. It suggested a species that developed by doing, failing, and remaking. "You cannot teach pride," one imperial general said. "But you can avenge it." Vorak's retreat carried with it a message that rippled outward: humans had been misclassified. An empire that had swallowed civilizations found an unconsumed something that fought back in a way that violated expectations. Where once humans had been curiosities on old probes, now envoys and traders requested audiences. The Centauri Republic, the Free Traders Coalition, the names read like bookmarks in a universe that had folded toward Earth. Admiral Morrison watched diplomatic streams flood his office. Offers came as if someone had whispered potential at a threshold. Some asked for alliances, others offered trade in exchange for military secrets. It was tempting. The moral calculus here was brutal: share technology and gain powerful friends, or hoard it and stay sovereign but isolated. Morrison felt the responsibility like a physical weight. Whatever he decided would shape whether humanity would be a corner of a larger cosmic neighborhood or become a weapon wielded by cunning hands. On Earth the industrial might shifted permanently. Shipyards that had made luxury transports now birthed warframes. Schools founded programs for hybrid engineering. Dr. Amy Rodriguez's lab expanded into an institute where human intuition and alien principles were taught side by side. There, students learned the radical lesson that the best solution is sometimes the one that would have been too risky if tried first: iteration as doctrine. General Cooper, sitting in his command center, had a different worry. The Imperial High Command was not known for modesty. Zargo and his advisors marshaled an armada more massive than any in living memory, 200 ships, forged to answer a single battle clip. That fleet would not merely test the Defiance again, it would attempt to erase the variable humanity represented. Human engineers, however, had learned an important cultural advantage. Where the Empire used uniformity, humans used diversity. They built 12 ships, then 24, testing small variations in weapon combinations, angle of armor, hybrid drive tuning. It was an industrial version of biological diversity, many experiments running in parallel so a failure in one would not doom the species. Captain Ben Clark watched the new fleet assemble like a proud and frightened parent. The Defiance now had sisters. The determination, the resolve, the courage, each bearing family traits but unique in their temperament. Each crew had been chosen not only for technical skill but for resilience. Humans learned quickly that morale and stubbornness were strategic resources as real as any alloy. Sub-Admiral Vorak's humiliation had become a problem for the Empire's status quo. Fleet Admiral Zargo could not tolerate a single ship's failure reflecting badly on Imperial doctrine. He authorized a new armada, heavier, smarter, and instructed by lessons the Empire had been forced to learn. Imperial officers studied every byte of Defiance footage, trying to backsolve human ingenuity into replicable procedures. They would attempt to sterilize unpredictability, turning improvisation into ritual. Yet with the Empire's resolve came a countercurrent of fragile alliances. Species under Imperial weight whispered to Earth in secret, would humanity be a liberator? Could humans teach them how to fight differently? Offers of embassies and trade rights arrived as emotional entreaties. Against the Empire's mechanical certainty, there arose a messy, ineffable coalition of hope. Morrison found himself reading messages from species that had been subjugated for centuries. Their requests were not simply commercial, they were pleas, tired, careful, and raw. Morrison's decision-making became a study in balance. Military advantage meant open sharing of hybrid designs, but cultural advantage meant keeping secrets that might prevent the galaxy from becoming a bloodier place. Rodriguez argued for a middle way, share the principles, not the blueprints. Teach resilience, not recipes. On the frontline deck, Captain Clark followed orders that were as political as martial. The Defiance and her fleet were a statement: humanity would not be crushed into the existing order, but they also refused the dream of empire. Clark's crews trained under the knowledge that their ship's victory was not a final triumph but an opening gambit. They would need to be ready for a larger invasion, for infiltration, for the diplomatic knives the empire could wield. Across neutral systems the legend grew: humans who fought without imperial restraint, who built ships to take punishment and to answer with a different kind of science. The myth of humanity's strange technology spread and changed perspective. Merchant houses shifted loyalties. Minor systems began to whisper about independence. The Empire's authority, authoritarian, efficient, found itself questioned in places it had always expected to control. Fleet Admiral Zargo did not accept such erosion. He ordered more than ships, he ordered doctrine. The Empire adapted as empires do, by trying to force the world back into uniformity. He poured resources into developing countermeasures for hybrid weapons. He funded a new school of tactics: anticipate variability by introducing stochastic modeling into fleets. The galaxy, for a time, became a laboratory for escalating answers and counter-answers. Humanity's changes were not only technical. Society itself shifted. Millions volunteered for defense, not out of blind nationalism, but because a young species found identity in being seen. Earth's leaders used this energy not only to arm but to teach. Propaganda was subtle: it framed the Defiance's victory as defense of not only humanity but of freedom across the stars. The moral ambiguity of that message haunted Morrison, who worried about the easy slide from protector to hegemon. But there were quieter transformations too. Children drew ships that looked like heavy hearts. Artists painted the Defiance as both a warrior and a temple. Poets wrote that humans had learned an ancient cosmic truth: survival sometimes asks a species to become more complex morally than it was technologically. That complexity, once embraced, could become the species' real weapon. When the Imperial fleet finally gathered, 200 ships arrayed with the slow majesty of a storm, Earth and its allies did not face them with a single idea. They faced them with a mosaic: hybrid weapons, improvised tactics, coalitions with former vassals, and a cultural refusal to be predictable. That mosaic was messy and dangerous, but it had a kernel of truth: surprise cannot be catalogued. In the end, the war that would follow would not be decided by a single ship or design. It would be decided by a habit of mind, the willingness to experiment, to fail, and to change. Admiral Morrison thought of the Phoenix again, of her diplomatic mission that had turned into a wound and then into a crucible. First contact had been a thunderclap, now it was a lesson. The choice before humanity was not merely whether to survive, but what kind of presence they would become among the stars.